Hi, this is Dr. Alana James, and today is a great basic day that every doctoral student ought to review. Because what we're going to do is talk about what goes where in the first 3 chapters. This hour could perhaps save you lots of time. Because the more you understand how this logic goes and how other people have done it and what the important key issues are from an examiner's point of view, the more likely you can get closer to done on your first drafts rather than your 10th or 11th drafts. So that's what's happening here. I welcome to everybody and those who are watching by recording. Let me get started. All right, so we start with quotes, and today I wanted to look for organization. So Milne says organization is what you do before you do something, so that when you do it, it's not all mixed up, and that's what we're doing today. And we're going to see, you're going to see in a lot of places, we're going to start using some Williams-Isner quotes. His book on writing well, should you have time to look it over, is one of the classics on what makes for good writing. And he tells us that writing is learned by imitation. If anyone asked me how I learned to write, I'd say I learned by reading the men and women who were doing the right kind of writing, who were doing the kind of writing I wanted to do, and trying to find out how they did it. Okay, so writing means organizing your thoughts. And if your mind is scattered, your writing is scattered. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced that. I know I have. If your mind is focused, your writing will be clear, or at least more clear. And then your reader has a much better chance of saying, yes, I get it. So that's our goal for today, is to help everybody who's watching have that experience. How are we going to get there? Well, we're going to talk about each chapter, 1, 2, and 3, in 3 different ways, or tangentially in 3 subjects: purpose, structure, and then some hints to give you about each. After I clean up a few typos on these slides, I will have them available, and you should know that this is a first part of 2 parts, because this coming Friday, also at the same time, we'll be discussing how technology is useful to this. And you'll get lots and lots of links on those slides, which might be things that you would find useful. Then following that up on the 22nd, I'm going to continue the conversation that I started a little in one of our groups on socialization. Because if we understand, it's one of these theoretical underpinnings that helps doctoral students go forward. If you understand the issues in doctoral work as they're broken out from this framework, then you can say, oh, I get it, I'm confused, and it's the kind of confusion that comes with ambiguity, and then you know what to go do to help yourself. So that conversation of what is socialization and why should you care is going to be on the 22nd. And I see all of these things adding up to people being stronger as they write their proposal. So, chapter 1, what's its purpose? I'm going to take these in order as they are read by your reader. And I think the most important thing you always are doing is you are writing for your reader. Too many students, in my opinion, get caught writing for themselves or their teachers or other students or to prove themselves, all of which are tangential goals to what really counts, which is your final committee and your examiners. And then after that, equally, the readers who read it when it's a done deal and you're a doctor, and they're going to use your work to catapult their own. So the sooner, I believe, that students can move from the student headspace into the professional headspace, the better. So what counts in chapter 1 from that end goal? Well, it counts to your reader that you have provided them with a clear and precise picture of what this document, thesis or dissertation, depending on what part of the world you're in, is about, and how it's going to go, and what you're doing. And this is Dr. not mine. She uses the first chapter. She has people do it first, and she uses the first chapter as a guide to check whether or not where you are, so that if you lose yourself, you can go back to it. I believe you should have a guide, that you should know where you're going, but I'm not sure, in my opinion, I wouldn't recommend it to be the first chapter. But you know, that's how I say, doctoral work is an art form. It is not a prescription. If there was only one way to do it, more people would get it done. So you have to choose your own way and what works for you. On the other hand, we'll all be opinionated and tell you how we think it should go. All right, chapter 1, structure. Introduction, overview of the subject, which includes then a background of what's going on, what you're studying, why you're studying it, maybe your background's in there. Theoretical and conceptual framework. So how does this thing that you are studying fit in the wider theoretical positions in the world, or what kind of concepts are you playing with? Because our work as researchers is on 2 planes, isn't it? It's on the mental plane and the practical plane. And both planes need to be introduced in this chapter. The key central portion of your chapter is your problem statement. It's 2 paragraphs. It's a pretty defined piece of writing. And if you do it well, it probably won't get done well right away, but you'll keep having iteration after iteration after iteration. And at the end of it, if you do your problem statement really well, you'll be able to variations on it in every journal article that comes out of what you're doing. So it's like the heart of this chapter. Now then from those things, and that kind of sets, if you take that top section, as your reader, I understand your ideas and where this art is in the world, and kind of what the problems are that are bringing you to do this research, problems and ideas. Then you're going to tell me how you're going to do it. So what's the purpose of this particular study? That's finite, whereas the previous things were sort of loose, a bigger picture things. This is finite. And then your research question, very finite. And your research design, in short. Like, I would want to know that it's an action research study and it has mixed methods applications, and that this is the population, and these are the ways you're going to collect data. That's all. That's like a paragraph or 2, because you don't want to be redundant to your entire chapter 3. Now, let's say that another way. You're going to set us up with what should be studied, and then the theory that the world places around it, and what you expect to achieve. And then, with that, what questions you're going to answer or test, and how those answers will be looked at. Different words, same idea. The ones on the left are more likely to be your heading. Okay. And Adrian mentions that writing helps bring scattered thoughts to a coherent entity, and you do that very well, Adrian. And so writing these things out will bring them into some cohesion, which is excellent. Just always consider, if you're using your writing that way, then it's going to be iterative. If you have worked your writing out, your scattered thoughts out in other ways, and this is different people, different strokes, so some people mind map, some people do all of the above. I use spreadsheets. Then my writing gets less scattered because my spreadsheet put it together for me. So different strategies, and that's what the Fridays are for, is kind of a discussion of our strategies. All right, so we have the structure. Now, what are the hints? Well, I personally think this is the last, if you're in Europe and you're retrofitting, you haven't really had to do any of your final writing until you've got your data and your analysis. Then I would say outline your chapter 1 and then leave it to write until everything else is written, except your abstract, which is the very final thing. Because the more you work in the long form, the shorter your short form can be. Now, what do I mean by that? If I have written out my chapter 3 and it is 20 pages of what my methodology is, then it's easier for me to tell you in 3 sentences what my methodology is. Because I've gotten all those little fuzzy bits out of my head, and I've organized them, and I've put them down, and I feel solid about them, and then voila, you get the one-liner that encapsulates it all. It's really nice if you have those one-liners or one-paragraphers before you write this chapter, because this chapter will be the first chapter that your examiners will read. More than likely, they may skip around, but good chance this is where they start, and then they skip around. And if you haven't engaged them in this chapter, you will have a tougher examination. So, nice to have it as well written as possible. That means it's as concise as possible, and the language in which you write is as strong as possible. As I said, on the other hand, Maria disagrees with me. She has people write these first, and then she would say she has them write them over and over again until it gets to the same place. What counts is concise, direct, strong writing that goes exactly where you want it to go. The other hint here is it is good if you can get your voice into it. Now, different universities, different strategies about whether or not you can use first person have seen very effectively used. For instance, there's one of the award winners that I use is from Thailand, and he takes a couple of paragraphs describing youth sexuality in Thailand at the time of his study, and where the culture was and why the study is worth having. And it's very personal. I mean, you can feel that he's telling people outside of Thailand about Thailand. So there's something in there that has his voice. And Adrian suggests a 0 draft. Yes, 0 drafts. Very good things. And you're going to have more and more. It's going to be an iterative process. So see, if you can get, some universities will let you have a section that says about the researcher and what this means to me, and you get to tell your personal story. That's all good. At the end of the day, chapter 1, you want to engage your reader, however you do it. Questions on chapter 1? If not, just say no, and I'll move on. Let me go back to this in case that brings up something. Okay, Jane says no. So Adrian asks, chapter 1 is a condensed version of the rest of the chapters for the most part. Yes. Yes. Although, if we go back, providing your reader a clear and precise picture of what it is about. So the about part is a little different than what you do in 2 and 3. It's about your subject in the world. It's might be about how you come to this subject because of you personally. See that? So consider that word about. But other than that, yes. You do want it to be more than just a condensed version. You don't want your reader at the end to be saying, oh, when they come across the same ideas in chapter 3, you want to not have them feel like that's redundant. But so stress the about part. And this 2-paragraph problem statement and this purpose of your study Yeah, okay, so let's talk about. Knowing that you are drilling into second language learning and some particular nuances of does this work better than this. The about part is about second language learning in the world. Does anybody care? Well, they care because lots and lots of people are moving around the world. It'd be nice to have a few. I'm making this up, Adrian. Don't take it for, I'm just using it as an example of how you can expand. But you then are looking at second language learning in the world, how many people are learning second language, what are some of the things that have come up for them, why does this very specific topic matter? That's about. Jane, want to type in real quickly what your topic is, and I'll do another about if you're interested. If you have it, I'll go on. And while she's typing, I'll tell you mine. So I write about PhDs completing. The fact that a lot of stressors come up and that there is a whole body of literature called socialization theory, and it has 40 years of research, and yet for some reason nobody who is practically designing higher education for graduate students relies very much on this theory. So my about includes 50% of PhDs finishing, socialization theory for that long, and the fact that the operationalizing of socialization theory is new. So that would be my about. Okay, Adrian says she approaches that topic of second language learning from a chronological evolutionary perspective. Yes, that's fine. You just need to hook your reader. So think about your reader, and then what is the hook? And that hook is the about. And then you go very deep and specific into the stuff of it in chapter 2, and that's appropriate. And Jane's about home, school, and community perspectives on the strengths and resources of culturally and linguistically different children and families. So then you're about one, I'm going to call it a funnel now, that may draw us in, would be a discussion on how diverse our world has become and how it's much more likely that culturally and linguistically different children and families are in the same schools and in the same neighborhoods. And then you would drill from that into the specific neighborhood in whatever you're going to be studying or however you're going to cut and chop and dice your study. And then that leads us into the lit review. So if done well, chapter 1 hooks me as an examiner and it leads me into the lit. I kind of know, by the end of chapter 1, I know how you're studying what you're studying, and then I have a pretty good idea of where the lit's going to take me. Okay, we'll go on to the lit. Now, what is your purpose in your lit review chapter? Well, It's to discuss the literature in your field. All right, that's pretty broad. And to present it in a way that's organized and articulated so that it gives your reader a supported view of all these things. And it's very important that you understand that you need to have all 6 of these things in your lit review. We need to leave it knowing what the current knowledge and about the research and topic and problem. So how are other researchers looking at your problem and topic? How have they studied it? What have they thought? How does that relate to yours? Coming from those, I understand what variables are common from other people and which ones you're choosing, how other people see, how they explain the world, and then somehow out of that, you need to be introducing me to your own position, not usually quite so much as a section that's called my own position, but I should see flavors of your ideas coming through so that then I have a clear presentation given to me about what gaps exist from your position and then how your study will address them. Now, the structure of this is most frequently it's drawn out like a funnel where you start with the broader elements and then you drill into the specifics. There's 3 or 4 different basic structures to lit reviews. They're covered on the site, but all of them provide a roadmap. So your introduction, I'm drilling now down into just what you're going to tell me in the first 2-3 paragraphs of this chapter. You're going to tell me how this chapter is going to go. You're going to tell me about the research problem, so I remember it in case I didn't read your last chapter recently. I'm going to be reminded of the importance or significance of your study. I'm going to then have a few comments from you about the extent and the nature of the review. So this review takes us through first a brief history, and then leads us into the work of the other researchers who have done this work in this country, but not this country, or whatever. So you're going to give me the boundaries of your review and the nature of it. It's going to review both the qualitative and the quantitative work, or it's going to review discourse analysis, or it's going to review a number of things, all the writing in this field from the theoretical point of view. There are reasons you chose the literature you chose. Make sure your introduction gets that to me, so I'm really clear what I'm going to read. Describes the objectives of the review. So the objective of this review is to help, I'll use my own work, and the objective of my review on socialization theory is to unpack how all the researchers prior to 2006, when Gardner developed her model of socialization, how all of their work actually adds to Gardner's work and how that work rolls out pragmatically to new evolutionary components of PhD education. So one thing leads to another, and you can say it in a sentence or two, and describes how the chapter is organized. Again, a little bit about the same thing. You can do how the chapter is organized, and then for these objectives, you can mix up how you do this, but you want to make sure you have all the components. I'm just going to go back for a minute. There's my purpose. There's what my introduction says. This is the slide I was looking for. And then how does the whole thing go together? Well, you have that introduction I just discussed, and then you have the body of your discussion. So I'd like to say this is a chapter that really you should think about in terms of tell me what you're going to do it, and then tell me what you've done. That's not a bad thought process for all of the chapters, but it's very important for this one. So you've given it to me, all those components in the introduction. Then you tell me, take me through the body of your work. These are the main authors. These were what they discussed. You discuss things in terms not of the people, but of the points they've made, and how all the points they made go together to be the thing you want to discuss. Remember, this is your argument, so you need to own this, even though you are citing, you might have 2/3 sentences and 1/3 citations, but you need it to go together to tell us what you want to say. You discuss all the themes in a nice, organized fashion, and then you explain from that what the gaps are. And from the gaps, you get to the research questions and the objectives and the hypothesis of the whole thing. This has to be a one-to-one correspondence with your ultimate methodology. We have to, at the end of this chapter, exactly know why you're studying what you're studying and the way you're studying it. Because that's true, we may need some theory or some conceptual discussion as well. It's very much dependent upon your study and the field you're in. So, Adrian, studied are often synonymous. It's also concepts can be, themes and concepts are what to be investigated, or it's kind of how you unpack these ideas. So right now, I'm unpacking PhD completion in terms of socialization theory, and specifically 6 concepts in that theory. And then because we can look carefully at the concepts, we can design. So that's how our minds work, isn't it? We understand the big, nice packages, and then we get from the nice packages into things we can study. And that's, so you can actually draw out these chapters like that, big section, little sections underneath it, and then topics that go under that lead directly to your study. That's why, for most people, a funnel is an idea that works. Hints. Oops, what happened to hints? This chapter is perilous. I thought that was a good word. It really is perilous. If you're in the United States and you have a proposal, it is this chapter that will cause you the grief at defensive proposal most of the time. They'll fine-tune your methodology, but they'll dig into this if they want. If your design wobbles, it wobbles because you have not given us a lit that backs up your study. And so that makes the whole thing wobble, because then we don't understand the significance of your study, or maybe the way you're studying it doesn't seem credible. I mean, pretty serious questions come when this chapter isn't tight. So think about it. I think one thing that's useful, it's a hint, may work for you, is to think about it like it's an argument. Like you have to, I think, this is my claim. My claim is that PhDs don't graduate because of these 6 things aren't taken seriously enough, and that if we put them together in technology, it will be useful. And then I back up my claim through these pieces of literature, which lead to these warnings. We believe that the more you understand what it makes to make a good argument, the better all of your writing will be, but specifically the better your lit will be and the better your discussion will be at the end. So this goes under the heading that Dr. Maria talks a lot about in terms of critical thinking and critical analysis. And so she would suggest to you to perform a critical analysis in all the sections of the literature review chapters. So if you go to her prior webinars And the things, if you were to say on the site, the skill you were looking at was critical writing and critical. Perilous like a minefield. Yes, perilous like a minefield. Perilous like, as a beginner, it's slowly going through something. And I think it's useful, and the reason I put it up as a hint, for you to take this seriously like it's a minefield, and to really do a lot of thinking. To perform critical analysis is a great one. This is a chapter that the more you think about your work before you jump in, the better chance that we should have. And if you are ready, we'll move on, but tell me one way or another. It says you need bomb radar to navigate through chapter 2. Let me tell you what that is. And then take them through the headings and you'll see right away by talking it out where the weak points are. Talk it. Think it. I'll put bullet points under the heading, so you say, don't start to really write. We get ourselves in trouble here when we have a brilliant idea and we write out something we want to say. Better to let those moments, write them out and put them somewhere, but don't put them in this structure until you're sure you've got the structure right. That will help your radar. And we'll see if Jane has a question. That's nicely put, Adrian. Let our thoughts sink in and saturate. Yes. Talk it. Do it. Own it. Live it. I read through my, as you know, if you've been watching the technology series, I do my pre-writing in spreadsheets. And I read my columns before I go to bed at night, and then I can let those ideas sink in. And if I'm going to write on one column tomorrow, I'll kind of read through that column. And then the organization of that column comes to mind, and that all goes together. And the columns add up for me. That's why I do this work in spreadsheets. But however you organize it, Jane says, just thinking, I do use headings and subheadings. Good. Even if I'm not necessarily going to keep them all in the end. Yeah, but they are headings and subheadings, and then the points under them that will make up the paragraphs are the basic structure of writing. And because writing is iterative, they will move around. When I get a little unhappy, it depends on the person. But if I'm coaching somebody and they turn into me a structure for a chapter in headings and subheadings, and then they come back to me with something entirely different, it had better be crystal clear why they did that, why they made the jump. It's quite odd. I mean, sometimes it is just iterative, and what we did today isn't the best thing, and our brain just knows it, and the next iteration is completely different. That's fine. but do notice how things track, because you know, we can write the same thing 6 ways. Only when we are critically thinking about our work can we absolutely know which of the 6 ways is the one we want to go with. Is that making sense? I hope so. Everything, it mushes until the day you turn it in. And oftentimes, headings and subheadings change in order, but not in content. So you may decide that these subheadings really nicely cluster over here in order to show the gap better than they were when you first put them together over this other place. I had a coach and editor when I was going through this process, and mostly what she did was she reordered my paragraphs. So I'd get back these funny track change documents with big areas that were all red because she was cutting and pasting them. But when I really got into it, I saw that the flow she was establishing made it flow better. Okay, on to the next. Chapter 3, what's the purpose? It needs to provide 3 kinds of information, and if you keep these 3 purposes in mind, you will do a better chapter 3 than if you're only doing the first one. So, first you need to tell us how the study is going to be conducted, or as you're writing it past tense, then it's how it was conducted. We need to be able to evaluate how valid the study is as a result and if it's replicable. So you have to think that you give enough finite detail that someone else in your position could exactly or pretty close to exactly replicate your study. And wouldn't that be lovely? Because if your study is important enough for them to replicate, then you and they together are establishing a body of research in your field, and that's really nice. That's the kind of work that ends up being foundational for other people. So keep in mind detail, specificity, the need to replicate as you write. Too often, I read these chapters and they're all good until it gets to data collection and analysis, and then they get really mushy. Because frequently, the author has written the introduction and the research design a couple of times. They've had to write it into their university to tell them what they're doing. They've had to discuss it, etc. Population and sample isn't that difficult if you understand the concepts behind them. But then you get to a data collection, and the first time through, the person is just not clear at all. It's like they don't really understand data collection. And if they're qualitative, well, it might be true for both. I don't read that many quant studies, but their data analysis section is just like a few paragraphs. It's not specific at all. When you write this as a retrofitter, when you're done and you've done it, then you can really specifically say, go back to your journal. I always recommend that researchers at this point keep a journal, so you can go back and you can be very specific about the choices you made through the analysis process and why you changed or didn't change certain things. If you are doing a quant study, you give us your instruments. Most often they're talked about and discussed in the chapter and then referred to in an appendix. And generally the same kind of thing with a qualitative or mixed method study. The specific interview questions, again, are best put, in my opinion, in an appendix. And then the limitations and assumptions that you have built this study on, and you can believe that your examiners will have seen them by now. So read a lot of studies and see if you can pick out the limitations and assumptions of that person. And if you can, then you can write that section. Yes, Adrienne mentions that her advisor is asking for a section relating to the choice of methodology. And that is, I've seen it in Chapter 2 as well as in Chapter 3. When the author says, you know, there were a lot of choices here, and I didn't choose this one, and I didn't choose this one because. So it's a couple of paragraphs, and it has to do with why yours is a case study and not an ethnography, or why it's a this and not a that. And it actually comes in nicely here because those are the delimiters. They lead those choices of which methodology you use are hand in glove with the delimiters of your study. I didn't do an ethnography because I didn't have access to these people over a long period of time, or I wasn't able to see them in their home environment, or I wasn't whatever. That's also a delimiter on the study, and could for some be seen as a limitation that your study asked interview questions and you didn't live with the people. So those run together in your research design. When you're designing, you're conscious mostly of the choices you're making to do things, but you're also making choices of what you won't be doing. And so this chapter needs to tell people that. My advisor told me that if you do a really good job with limitations and delimiters, then that makes your defense easier because it takes things off the table. So you can say, I chose to do this because of that. I chose to do a convenience sample in a particular neighborhood because this particular program is so well run in that neighborhood, I thought I would get the best results. Takes off the table a discussion about why it wasn't a random sample from something else. So again, be aware when you're doing Chapter 3 that you're getting what you do as well as what you're not doing. Hints. Analyze your model. And by that, I mean the 5 model dissertations that you've pulled down and you have on your desk that are well-written, award-winning, your methodology, your supervisor, and your topic. And you look at them for each of these chapters, but especially for Chapter 3, especially for the one that's most like yours. Then you set up your first set of headings. Then you analyze an award winner that's pretty close to yours. This is where the thinking before doing comes in. And then you start to write, employing the principles that you've come out. So if you are reading an award winner and you say, wow, I really like the way they wrote this paragraph, mark that paragraph and make a note in your outline to read that paragraph again before you write yours. And then just some very specific points. Each element needs to be very clear and precise. You can't have any questions. Your examiner should not have any questions at the end of this chapter. Provide as many details as possible so that somebody can replicate. If you keep that in mind, you're likely to write in some finite stuff you wouldn't consider otherwise. That'll help your examiner as well. And explain how the instruments were developed or chosen, or if they were piloted, or if you ask these people. I mean, we really want to know why you think your questions are going to get to where you think they're going to go. And the more you have worked that, the more your own understanding of the process will show, and that will come through. And one of Adrienne's mentors said, you cannot be too specific here. You really can't be too specific. I can cruise over your being, as an examiner, I can cruise your writing, but I should not have a question. So, are there questions about Chapter 3? Going back to, I think, if it'll let me go back to these portions. Raise your hand if you don't, but if you do, I'll hang out for a second and wait till the typing comes through. Good. Thank you. Good. Jane, how about you? And for people who are watching by recording, if you had a question, Alana at doctoralnet.com, and I'd be happy to answer. Or in the Big Marker system, you can write notes to each other. And I get then an email that says there's a note to answer. So that works as well. Good. All right. There's also, speaking of checklists, Jane, there on one of the things that there'll be a link to in the Friday conversation is, I believe all of these chapters, at least 2 of these chapters have checklists up in DoctoralNet that drill down into a little bit more specificity. Now, so what's up here? We have 2 more Fridays. This coming one I took it off too early. We have 3 more Fridays. This coming one, there's a Friday on these chapters and what are the technology to help you with them. Then there is on the 18th a whole lot of conversation about tools for motivation, and I'm doing some writing right now. I'm really pretty disturbed with recent literature on how graduate students have high incidence of depression and mental health issues. Technology helps people with motivation and build it off of some work by Seligman on flourishing and some other psychologists. Then on December 3rd, the last Friday is tools for data collection, and it will overview. I hope to learn a lot myself here, what's new and happening in the world of tools for qualitative and quantitative work. Now, webinars, there's going to be a new one that isn't on the Thursday of next week, I believe, and it's going up today, so keep an eye out. She's going to talk about bias, all the different kinds of bias in research, and in her good, excellent way of unpacking all the things that need to be unpacked, it should be an excellent time. Then we did What Goes Where today. On the 22nd, I'm really drilling into doctoral socialization, whilst be self-aware and know where to get the help you need when you need it, rather than just kind of be fuzzy about the fact that you don't feel very good about your doctoral work, but what does that mean? We're going to talk about findings. I have been working with someone who did a great job of coming qualitatively between results and findings, so I'm going to use his as a case study, and then really get into theoretical and conceptual frameworks. So it's a good set of few more interesting topics coming up through the end of the year. Looking at 2017 from organizational point of view, how are you going to move your thesis forward? What are the big chunks? When do you need to have stuff into your advisors so that you move on past the summer vacations and all the kinds of things you do to plan a good year? And then we're going to try something, so please put December 14th in your calendar if you can. I thought it would be fun to try to have a party. And you can't bring food. It can't be a potluck on the internet, but we might be able to bring videos we like, just interesting things we can share, and just have fun with each other because we see each other once a week, some of us. Don't forget that there are also groups. Tonight is a read, listen, comment. It's the last writing group that people will be able to join. The rest will be closed by invitation only for the rest of the year. And then the lingerers group, which is really a moving ahead group. And that would be the following week. Back and forth. Oh, good. So Adrian says Dr. Maria's got her webinars up. Webinars, plural. Excellent. And it was a good hour. Thank you both for being here. Let me turn off the recording. Thank you to everybody who watched by recording. And once again, if you have questions, Alana or Margie at doctoralnet.com. You are more than welcome, Jane. I appreciate you coming. Otherwise, I'm just talking to an empty room, and it's not nearly as good. Oh, okay. So she did one webinar, but Adrian gets multiple copies every time we send something. Oh, well. I'm really glad for both of you to join, as always. And you may be back in an hour. We will be, as Margie and I go on with a read, listen, comment group. So see you both.